Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video, and welcome to another Trollope Thursday. Today I'm going to be introducing Anthony Trollope's two big series, the Barsetshire Chronicles and the Palliser novels. So, hello, if you're new here, I'm Katie. I love the Victorian author Anthony Trollope a lot, and over the past few weeks and over the next few weeks, I am talking about his books. I have just finished reading all 47, and I have many things to say about his books. I will leave a playlist down below where you can find more of my videos about Anthony Trollope, but today I'm going to be focusing on his two big series, his two very famous series, each of 6 interconnected novels. That's the Chronicles of Barsetshire and the Palliser novels. That is mostly what this video is going to be focused on, and then at the end of the video I'm also going to talk a bit about what I guess we're going to call the Anthony Trollope Metaverse, and about some of the other connections between his novels, because although he has these two sort of 6-book series, all of his books are kind of all set in the same world, or nearly all of them, and there are some other links between some of his books as well. I will start off by talking about the Barsetshire Chronicles, and then I'll move on to the Palliser books. And I will also leave linked down below in the description some quite old videos I made where I made individual book reviews of all of the books in the Barsetshire Chronicles and all of the books in the Palliser books. They are quite old videos, so the audio quality is not great and I talk very fast. And I feel like my voice was a bit different then. But hey, if you want longer reviews of those books, they will be linked down below too. Before I get into talking about the series in more detail, let me repeat what I have said before on this channel, which is that I would highly recommend, if you're going to read either of Anthony Trollope's series, to read them in order. They are both series of interconnected novels where individual novels have some new plots and some new characters, but all of the books in the series will spoil previous books in the series, and your emotional investment and enjoyment will be much better if you read them in order. And there are some reasons why it is worth reading the Chronicles of Barsetshire before you read the Palliser books, which I will get into in a minute. But yes, let me first of all talk to you about the Barsetshire Chronicles. I am going to have to put these books down because they are very heavy. I have some nice old Folio Society editions of the Chronicles of Barsetshire that I have found in secondhand bookshops. I'll probably put up some other book covers on the screen as I talk through this series. So as I said, the Chronicles of Barsetshire are a series of 6 interconnected novels, and they're all set in the fictional county of Barsetshire, which is a rural English county, and its sort of county capital is Barchester. So Barchester is the city, Barsetshire is the county. As I said, it is a series of interconnected novels, so the novels all have different plot lines and different central characters, but they're all set in the same county, and there are a lot of recurring characters and places that you see throughout the series, and some books are sort of more connected than others. So book 2, Barchester Towers, is a direct sequel to The Warden. They are very closely linked, with nearly all of the characters from The Warden appearing in Barchester Towers. And the final book in the series, The Last Chronicle of Barset, kind of brings all of the different characters from all of the different previous books together. So I do highly, highly recommend reading them in order. I think you'll get a lot more out of the series if you read them in their correct order. There are a few sort of themes and recurring things that crop up throughout the series. It's a series that looks a lot at church politics, and especially sort of divisions within the Church of England between high church and low church practices. It's also a series that looks really interestingly at provincial and rural life in Victorian England. It's a series that is focused sort of more on the middle and upper middle classes, in comparison to the Palliser series, which we'll get onto in a minute, which is a bit more aristocratic. It's a series that looks at class and money and marriage and family, and often sort of at family opposition to marriage. And it's a series that looks really interestingly at morality and moral decisions. The Chronicles of Barsetshire is a truly amazing series. It is my favourite book series of all time. I find it hugely emotionally rewarding and just so utterly powerful, and I love it very, very, very much indeed. So I'll quickly go through the 6 books in the series and tell you a little bit about what they are about. I will be spoiler free in this video entirely, so that may mean that I am talking in quite vague terms about some of the later books in the series. But anyway, The Warden is set in the cathedral city of Barchester and follows a man called Septimus Harding, who is a clergyman, and as part of his role as a clergyman, he is the warden of a place called Hiram's Hospital, which is basically an elderly people's home. And the plot of The Warden kind of revolves around what happens when someone calls into question Mr. Harding's right to draw the income he does from Hiram's hospital. Mr. Harding is a very moral, kind man who is appalled to think that maybe he has been receiving an unfair income, and he ends up finding himself torn between his son-in-law, Dr. Grantley, who very much thinks that he isn't in the wrong and shouldn't admit to being in the wrong, and his possible future son-in-law, Mr. Bold, who wants to marry Mr. Harding's daughter, Eleanor, and is the person saying that maybe Mr. Harding shouldn't be receiving the income that he is. And the book is kind of a moral dilemma novel in a way, but also looks at Septimus Harding's relationship with the people around him, and it's just a really, really good, interesting novel. I really love The Warden, but it's not like an absolute favourite Anthony Trollope novel, and it is a slightly slower, milder Trollope novel, I suppose, than some. I don't think it's necessarily the most exciting novel for everyone, and that is one of the reasons why I often recommend reading The Warden and Barsetshire Towers back to back, because I think Barsetshire Towers is, one, just a stronger novel overall, but I think it's also a more sort of exciting novel, and so a good way into the series is to read the two of them back to back. Then Barsetshire Towers is the second book in the series, which is also set in the cathedral town of Barchester, and we follow basically quite a lot of characters from The Warden, along with various new characters moving into town. Barsetshire Towers begins with the appointment of a new bishop, Mr. Proudy, who arrives in town with his wife and his chaplain, Mr. Slope, and they are all quite low church in comparison to the sort of religious establishment of Barchester, who are quite high church. So there's a lot of sort of church politics in this novel. And there's also another new family in town, the Stanhopes, who are fantastic. And we're basically following all of the sort of small town drama and rivalry of this place, as well as lots of church politics and various love stories as well. And I just think Barsetshire Towers is incredible. It's so funny, it's so well drawn, it's so powerful, there are so many fascinating characters in it. Obadiah Slope is just one of Anthony Trollope's best characters. He's absolute genius. He is very, very slimy, but he is so human, and I think he's just done so well. And it also has some sort of atypical love stories in it, which I really enjoy. The sort of heroines of the love stories, the female love interests, are not necessarily the conventional female love interests you see in Victorian books, which I really enjoy. Talking about Barsetshire Towers just makes me really, really want to reread it at once. The next novel in the series is Dr. Thorne, which is set in a small town within the county of Barsetshire. And this book follows a doctor called Dr. Thorne and his niece, who he lives with, Mary. Mary is illegitimate, which kind of gives her a complicated social status within the Victorian period, and she is in love with a man called Frank, who is the son of the local squire, and Frank's family don't want him marrying someone who is illegitimate, middle class rather than upper class, and doesn't have a lot of money. They have their eyes on a wealthier bride for Frank. So we follow the sort of love story there, as well as various subplots, one of which includes a man called Sir Roger Scratchit, who is a self-made man, very wealthy, not very respectable. His son is potentially romantically interested in Mary. Sir Roger himself is an alcoholic, and the way alcoholism and addiction is looked at in Dr. Thorne is fantastic, I think. Dr. Thorne is not my favourite book in the Barsetshire Chronicles, mostly because I think it's a much more like conventional Victorian novel than the rest of the series, and therefore it's just like slightly less exciting for me. Also, Mary and Frank's sort of love story is quite similar to a love story in Framley Parsonage, and I prefer the love story in Framley Parsonage, which leads us nicely onto book 4 in the series, Framley Parsonage. Framley Parsonage is about a young man called Mark Roberts. He is a young married clergyman with young children, and he finds himself getting into financial difficulties due to his sort of attempts to be more upper class than he is. Meanwhile, his sister Lucy is falling in love with Lord Lufton, a local nobleman, and his mother very much disapproves of this. So the Lucy Lord Lufton love story, I would argue, is sort of very similar in some ways to Mary and Frank in Dr. Thorne, but I like Lucy more as a character than Mary, I would say, and I feel like you get to know Lucy a lot better. So that is another reason sort of why Dr. Thorne ranks slightly less highly for me, but I love Framley Parsonage. I think it's really, really well done, and has some really, really interesting elements to it. There's also a subplot involving a man called Mr. Crawley, who will be important later on in the series, and we also meet various characters from Dr. Thorne and Barsetshire Towers again, which is lovely. Then the fifth book in the series is The Small House at Allington, which is my favourite book in the series and maybe my favourite novel by Anthony Trollope, although is it his standalone The Way We Live Now? Who can say? Small House at Allington is the wonderful story of two sisters, Belle and Lily Dale, who sort of remind me of Eleanor and Marianne in Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. Belle and Lily live in the small house at Allington, while their uncle, the Squire, lives in the great house at Allington. And we follow Belle and Lily and their romantic relationships. And I kind of don't want to tell you anything more than that, because one of the things I love about the small house at Allington is how unpredictable a novel it is and how unconventional a novel it is for the Victorian period. It has an incredible ending that I just loved, and I thought it was so well done. The book moves between rural Allington in Barsetshire and also London, where we're following a young man called Johnny Eames, and basically his coming of age story. And I love the Johnny Eames strand very, very much. Johnny Eames has my heart. What a character. He's so fun. I just absolutely love The Small House at Allington. I think the characterization and the themes and just everything about it are just top notch. Like, it's just so good. It's so good. Interestingly, I think it is a bit of a Marmite book. I think there are a lot of people who love The Small House at Allington and for whom it is the best book in the Barsetshire Chronicles. But I also know quite a few people who didn't get on with The Small House at Allington. I think partly because it is a slightly unconventional novel. There are therefore some plot decisions that I love that other people didn't love as much. But I do just think it's fantastic. And, you know, it probably is my favourite Anthony Trollope novel, even if I maybe think The Way We Live Now, my other favourite, is better, technically. But anyway, one other thing it is worth knowing about The Small House at Allington is that one of the subplots in the book introduces the character of Plantagenet Palliser, who is a very important character in the Palliser series, hence why I think it is worth reading the Barsetshire Chronicles before the Palliser books, because Plantagenet Palliser is introduced in the Barsetshire Chronicles. Then the final book in the series is The Last Chronicle of Barset, which is another truly amazing novel. It's the final chronicle, as it says, and it basically picks up with like nearly all of the characters from the previous books, drawing everyone together, as well as introducing some new characters. The central plot focuses on Mr. Crawley, who we met in Framley Parsonage, who is an impoverished clergyman who is accused of stealing a cheque. And the way this book looks at that situation and the strain it puts on Mr. Crawley's already difficult mental health, the effect it has on his family and especially his daughter and her love story, it's all great. And meanwhile, there are just so many subplots with so many different characters from so many different previous novels in the series, and all the loose ends are tied up, but like not in the wrong way, in the right way. The ends that should be loose are left loose. It's so good, and I love it very, very much. You just revisit like so many places and people from previous bits in the series, and it's just glorious. So I absolutely love The Last Chronicle. It's fantastic. As I said, I love the Barsetshire Chronicles very, very much. It is my favourite series of all time. If I had to rank the novels within it, my favourite is The Small House at Allington, next would come Barsetshire Towers, then The Last Chronicle, then Framley Parsonage, then The Warden, then Dr. Thorne. But it is a wonderful series, and I highly recommend reading them all and reading them in order. Talking about the Barsetshire Chronicles again does kind of make me want to reread them all. Maybe I should at some point host a read-along of them. It wouldn't be at once, because there are a few other read-alongs I'm taking part in that I'm not hosting, that I am enjoying at the moment, so that I want to dedicate more time to. But possibly starting later this year or next year, it could be fun to do a read-along of the Barsetshire Chronicles, because I would really like to reread them. It has been quite a few years since I read them. I have reread The Small House at Allington since I read the series the first time, but the other ones I've only read once, and yeah, it's a wonderful series. So that is the first big 6-book series by Anthony Trollope, but he also has a second 6-book series, and that is the Pallisers. So this series is sometimes called the Palliser novels or the Pallisers. The other title you will sometimes hear them referred to by is the Parliamentary novels. You hear the term Pallisers used much more often, but to be honest, I kind of think the Parliamentary novels is a more helpful title for the series. The Palliser family are important in some of the books in the series, in 3 books in the series especially, but there are other books in the series where they take much more of a back seat, and I would say that the books in this series are much more tied together by politics and Parliament than they are by the Pallisers. I think sometimes people go into the Pallisers sort of like excited to read a big family saga, and that's not really what this book series is. As with the Barsetshire Chronicles, this is a series of interconnected novels, so the novels have different plot lines, and some of them have different central characters, but they all feature characters from previous books and spoil previous books in the series, so I very much recommend reading them in order. And I would also say that the Palliser novels are like much more tightly bound together than the Barsetshire Chronicles. Like, I think there's probably more books in the Pallisers that would just make no sense if you dived right in the middle of the series. In terms of the themes and sort of recurring motifs of the Palliser series, it is generally set in London. It's a much more like aristocratic, more parliamentary focused series than the Barsetshire Chronicles. There's a lot of elections, a lot of parliament scenes, a lot of stuff about politics, but there's also a lot of stuff about family and class and love and money, and all of the other kinds of themes that Trollope likes to write about. The series in part focuses on the Palliser family, and specifically on Mr. Plantagenet Palliser, who is a politician for the Liberal Party, and his political career and the story of his relationship with his wife runs in the background of some novels and in the foreground of others. Their relationship is fantastically drawn and it's one of my favourite elements of the series, and I do kind of wish that they were in it even more than they are. I do love the Palliser books very much, but I definitely love the Chronicles of Barsetshire more. However, it may be that the premise of the Palliser books may sound more interesting to you personally. I think a lot of it is about personal taste. As I said, Mr. Palliser is introduced in the Barsetshire Chronicles in the small house at Allington, so I do think it is probably worth reading the Barsetshire Chronicles before reading the Palliser books, but you don't necessarily have to. There are also some spoilers for the Barsetshire Chronicles later on in the Palliser books, which I will get to as I go through the books. So let me go through the 6 books in the Palliser series. The first one is Can You Forgive Her? Can You Forgive Her follows a young woman called Alice who has just got engaged to a nice man called Mr. Grey, but she begins to wonder if he is too nice for her. She likes society and adventure and he likes peace and quiet, and she begins to wonder if her cousin George might suit her better. And the title of the book basically is asking, can you forgive Alice for the mess that she makes? I think there are a lot of really fantastic elements of Can You Forgive Her? George and his sister Kate are very interesting characters. Kate has a great arc. I like Alice a lot, and I think she is quite a dislikable character in some ways, but you also understand her. And I really like that in the novel Can You Forgive Her, she occupies a role that is sort of more typically given to men within Victorian novels, so I think that's quite interesting. And then in the subplots of Can You Forgive Her, we also are following Mr. Palliser and his wife and their not always super functional marriage. I find them really, really interesting characters. And in general, Can You Forgive Her is a really strong novel, very tense, very dramatic, with a lot of drama. If you want an Anthony Trollope novel with a bit more drama, then Can You Forgive Her is great for that. I was rewatching my old review of this from when I did my Palliser week many years ago, and I was thinking maybe I should have ranked Can You Forgive Her more highly in my Anthony Trollope ranking video that I did last week, because I do really love Can You Forgive Her, and it was nice to watch that review and remind myself of how much I love Can You Forgive Her. As I kind of mentioned already, Can You Forgive Her and the series as a whole does contain sort of minor spoilers for a subplot in the small house at Allington, because Mr. Palliser is introduced in the small house at Allington, but those spoilers aren't major. I think it is nice to be introduced to Mr. Palliser in the small house at Allington, because I think it's a good introduction to him, but I feel much more strongly that you should read each series in order than I do that you should read the Barsetshire Chronicles first, if you see what I mean. The second book in the Pallisers is Phineas Finn. This novel follows Phineas Finn, a young Irishman who comes to London originally to train as a barrister, but then decides to make a career for himself in politics. And we follow his attempts to build a political career and also his romantic relationships with many women. I think he has like 4 romantic interests, which, you know, is maybe too many. However, saying that, I think the female characters in Phineas Finn are great, especially Laura and Violet. I really, really enjoy their plot lines, and I also really enjoy that both of them are women who are very, very interested in politics. Lady Laura's plotline especially, I think, is done really well. But in general, reading Phineas Finn, I was much less invested in Phineas's plotline than I was in the plotlines of the women around him. In general, I really like Anthony Trollope's like flawed young men, but sometimes Phineas Finn is a bit too frustrating. I do also think that my general opinion on Phineas Finn has been slightly marred by my opinion on Phineas Redux, which is book 4 in the series, which we'll talk about in a minute. Then the third book in the series is the Eustace Diamonds, which follows a young woman called Lizzie Eustace, who is a young widow. After her husband's death, she is in possession of some diamonds, which she says her husband gave to her and therefore are her property. But her late husband's family say that they belong to the family, being a family heirloom, and lots of drama and legal shenanigans ensue. Lizzie is quite an interesting character, a bit of an anti-heroine. She has all this drama going on with the diamonds, but she also would quite like to remarry and has sort of 2 possible suitors, one of whom, her cousin Frank, is in love with another young woman, Lucy, who is a governess, and Frank sort of finds himself torn between Lucy and Lizzie, and sort of distracted by Lizzie's grandeur. The Eustace Diamonds is a fun read, very well paced and well plotted, with some really interesting characters, and it's one that I enjoyed at the time, but I wouldn't say has hugely stayed with me, and I do often find myself unfavorably comparing it with the Claverings, because the sort of Frank, Lizzie, Lucy love triangle is quite similar to the Harry, Julia, Florence love triangle in the Claverings, and I think it's done better in the Claverings. So I do think I am sort of slightly harsher in my mind on the Eustace Diamonds because I read it in the same year as I read the Claverings, but I do think it is well worth a read. Then next, at book 4 in the Pallisers is Phineas Redux, which is a direct sequel to Phineas Finn, in which Phineas continues his political career and things go a bit wrong for him. I feel like I can't say very much more about it without spoiling the novel Phineas Finn, because it is a direct sequel. I don't really like Phineas Redux. Out of his 47 novels, I would rank it at number 46. I think there's quite a few things I don't love about Phineas Redux as a novel. One thing I don't love about it is that I didn't really need another novel about Phineas Finn. As I said, Phineas Finn was my least favourite thing about the novel Phineas Finn. And I liked the novel Phineas Finn, I liked his arc in Phineas Finn, but I definitely didn't need a whole nother book about him. And I didn't love how Phineas Redux as a novel sort of like undoes and messes with certain plot decisions and character arcs from Phineas Finn. It's also quite a slow novel. Like, I found the pacing in the first half especially to drag a bit, and there are some plot decisions that he makes, especially to do with the ending, that I really didn't like. In general, I really like Anthony Trollope's plotting, and it's rare that he makes a plot decision that I really disagree with, but I didn't like the ending of Phineas Redux. I don't like the plot decisions within Phineas Redux. I do think it's really worth reading because it leads into book 5 and 6 in the series, which are incredible, but it is one of my least favourite books by Anthony Trollope. I don't think that it is like universally considered one of his weakest. There are a lot of people who really like it, and I think if you liked Phineas Finn, and if Phineas Finn as a character was not your least favourite thing about Phineas Finn, you'll probably enjoy Phineas Redux more. But yeah, it wasn't really for me. However, book 5 in the series, The Prime Minister, is incredible. It is my favourite book in the series, one of my favourite novels by Anthony Trollope. It's fantastic, and it is worth reading all of the series, including Phineas Redux, to get to the Prime Minister. In this novel, Mr. Palliser becomes the Prime Minister, and we follow his career and his role as Prime Minister, as well as his personal life. I love him as a character, and I feel like the way The Prime Minister as a novel looks at politics is really, really interesting. And the other main plot line in the book revolves around a couple, Emily and Ferdinand Lopez, who wants to get married, but her father disapproves, and there's another young man, Arthur Fletcher, who is in sort of deep unrequited love with her. In general, the way that The Prime Minister as a novel looks at politics and marriage and gender power dynamics within marriage is fantastic, and I think it's a really, really interesting novel. One thing that I think it's worth knowing about the Prime Minister is that some characters from Dr. Thorne, book 3 in the Barsetshire Chronicles, turn up in The Prime Minister, and The Prime Minister contains major plot spoilers for Dr. Thorne, and not sort of like spoilers for a subplot, spoilers for the main plot. If you read The Prime Minister, you will know how the story of Dr. Thorne ends. As I said earlier, I do think that Dr. Thorne is quite a conventional Victorian novel. Therefore, it is in some ways a somewhat predictable novel. So I feel like having Dr. Thorne spoiled for you is less of a big deal and is going to affect your enjoyment of the novel less than, say, having The Small House at Allington spoiled for you. So if you do read the Pallisers first, you know, it's probably not that big a deal, but I think that is worth knowing, and that might be a reason to read the Barsetshire Chronicles first. Then finally, there is book 6 in the Palliser series, The Duke's Children, which is another sort of all-time favourite of mine. I love it. I think it's an incredible novel. In this, we follow 2 young siblings, Lady Mary and Lord Silverbridge, their relationship with their father and the rest of their family, their romantic relationships. Lady Mary wants to marry a man who is sort of beneath her in the social hierarchy, and Lord Silverbridge is torn between 2 women while also having like massive financial difficulties due to his own terrible decisions. And I just think The Duke's Children is a really great novel with really interesting character relationships and themes. The book looks really powerfully at grief and at parenthood and at like generational divisions, as well as looking at money and class and relationships, and it's just a really, really strong novel. It is a very rewarding end to the Palliser novels, but I don't think it's quite as rewarding an ending to the series as The Last Chronicle of Barset is. Like, it doesn't pull things together quite in the same way, but it is really fantastic. One thing it is also worth knowing about The Duke's Children is that it does include a few characters from Anthony Trollope's generally otherwise standalone novel, The Way We Live Now. So basically Lord Silverbridge goes to the same club as some of the young men in The Way We Live Now, and there's one young man, especially Dolly Longstaff, who we see quite a bit of in The Way We Live Now, and we see quite a bit of in The Duke's Children too. There are therefore within The Duke's Children minor spoilers for The Way We Live Now. I don't think it like hugely spoils The Way We Live Now, but there are some minor plot spoilers, and I also think that if you read The Duke's Children without having read The Way We Live Now first, I don't know how well you will understand Dolly Longstaff as a character. So I would kind of recommend reading The Way We Live Now before reading The Duke's Children. So those are the 6 Palliser books. If I were to rank them, my ranking would be The Prime Minister as my favourite, then The Duke's Children, then Can You Forgive Her, then The Eustace Diamonds, then Phineas Finn, and then Phineas Redux right down at the bottom. As I said, I don't like Phineas Redux that much. However, I do highly recommend reading the whole series and reading them all in order, because it's a really rewarding experience. And the final 2 books in the series are so strong. So even though I don't love the Palliser series as much as I love the Barsetshire Chronicles, and even though Phineas Redux is one of my least favourite Anthony Trollope books, I do still think the series is really worth a read, and I do think it's worth reading all of them in order. So those are Anthony Trollope's 2 6-book series. These 2 series are some of Anthony Trollope's sort of most popular and most well-known books. All of these are still in print, which is more than can be said for all of Anthony Trollope's 47 novels, and they are generally really popular. I highly recommend them both. I wanted to talk about those 2 series today because they are sort of as complete works of literature, 2 of my favourite things that Anthony Trollope wrote, especially the Barsetshire Chronicles, but the Pallisers too I do think are really rewarding. And then next Thursday, I'm going to be talking in more detail about my favourite 15, I think, standalones by Anthony Trollope. In general, I would class all of Anthony Trollope's books that are not in those 2 6-book series as standalones. However, I do sometimes see lists of Anthony Trollope's books listing his 5 books set in Ireland as though they're a series. As far as I remember, there are no connections between those 5 books except for the fact that they are set in Ireland. I don't think there are any recurring characters, although I did read The Kellys and the O'Kellys a really long time ago. So if a character from The Kellys and the O'Kellys had turned up in another book, I probably wouldn't have noticed. But I wouldn't consider those 5 books a series. The 5 books set in Ireland, if you're interested while I'm mentioning them, are The McDermotts of Ballycloran, The Kellys and the O'Kellys, Castle Richmond, An Eye for an Eye, and The Landleaguers, which I definitely don't consider a series. However, as may be clear by the mention of the characters from The Way We Live Now who turn up in The Duke's Children, Anthony Trollope does like to have recurring characters even outside of his series. And in a way, like the vast majority of his novels are kind of set in the same universe. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the other links between his novels. So as I said, some characters from The Way We Live Now, which was published in 1875, turn up in The Duke's Children, the final book in the Palliser series, which was published in 1880. So The Way We Live Now comes first, The Duke's Children comes later, and we revisit some of the characters from The Way We Live Now. Then there are 2 characters, Miss Todd and Mary Baker, who appear both in The Bertrams from 1859 and also later in Miss Mackenzie from 1865. They are minor characters, so Miss Mackenzie does contain like minor spoilers for a subplot of The Bertrams, but not really major spoilers. I read Miss Mackenzie first and read the Bertrams later, and it didn't really bother me. To be honest, I read them quite a few years apart, and I sort of only really half noticed. It was only as I got towards the end of the Bertrams that I was like, Miss Todd feels kind of familiar. And then I realised that I had encountered her in Miss Mackenzie several years before. It's a minor spoiler, and I don't think that Miss Todd's plotline in the Bertrams is particularly unpredictable. So I don't think it's a huge deal, but that is worth knowing. And then there are two characters from The American Senator, which was published in 1877, Larry Twentyman and another character whose name I will not give, who turn up again in Iola's Angel, a novel published in 1881. I don't think it's a huge deal, but Iola's Angel will effectively spoil a subplot of The American Senator. It's not like the Prime Minister, which spoils the main plot of Dr. Thorne, but that might be worth knowing. Those are the big ones, I think, but I have read Anthony Trollope's novels over 10.5 years, so I may have missed some, and it's quite hard to find any other information about this anywhere. So if you have spotted any other characters turning up in multiple Anthony Trollope novels, do let me know. There are definitely a few passing mentions of people in other books. There is a law firm, Slow and Bide a While, what a great name for a law firm, who turn up in quite a few books. And there's also several mentions of Barsetshire and the Bishop of Barsetshire, etc., in various other Anthony Trollope novels outside of the Barsetshire Chronicles, which is really fun. I'm rereading the Claverings at the moment, and there's just a passing mention of Bishop Proudie, which is really lovely. And I think technically means, from what was said, that Clavering as a place is actually in Barsetshire, though that is never mentioned elsewhere in the novel. It's just that Bishop Proudie is mentioned as being the bishop of the diocese. I kind of love that Anthony Trollope novels all take place sort of in the same universe. I think that's really, really fun. And it's really lovely when suddenly you're like, oh, hang on a second, haven't I met that character before? But I thought it might be helpful to know some of the books that might contain minor spoilers for other books. So there we go. Those are Anthony Trollope's two big series and the Anthony Trollope Metaverse. Do let me know down in the comments if you have any questions or thoughts. As I said, I will at some point do an Anthony Trollope FAQ and gather together questions I've been asked as I've been making this series. Otherwise, I'll be back next week to talk about my top 15 Anthony Trollope standalones. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.